The Beautiful Biting Machine by Tanith. Originally published as a chapbook in 1984, its next appearances were in 3 anthologies. The first in 1989 called The Arrows of Eros, the second in 1998 called Love is Strange, and the third being a 2002 collection in French with a title you'll thank me for not pronouncing. Finally, 29 years after its first publication, it appeared in a collection of the author's works entitled Space is Just a Starry Night in 2013. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Beautiful Biting Machine. When the 2 suns go down and it starts to get dark, the night fair wakes up, a beast with 1,000 bright eyes. 5 miles long, 4 miles wide, the valley is full of lights, noises, musics, between the tall and echoing hills. This world's a pleasure planet. It has many and various attractions. The night fair is only one. Here there are spinning wheels of yellow sparks against the dusk, and glittering neon ghost towers ringing with screams, and carousels that maybe come alive. Not everyone cares for these, or the candy awnings, the peppermint arenas, the cries of fortune-tellers in glass cages, the crashing of prearranged safe vehicular accidents, the soaring space flights that never leave the ground. Those that don't care for them don't come, but for those that do, there are the cuisine and superstition and popular art, the sex and syntax and the sin of 20 worlds to be sampled for a night or a week of nights. Who could tolerate more? So visit the Valley of Lights. Hurry, hurry, don't be slow or sly or shy. Welcome to the night fair. This gentle Varanian's got a slight complaint. Tell him to see a doctor. Don't cheek me, Beldek. No, Mr. Kyer. What seems to be the trouble, sir? Beldek and Kyer looked through the one-way window at the gentleman from Virani. Like all Varanians, he was humanoid, greenish, fretful. Virani did not esteem the human race, but was patronizingly intrigued by it and its culture. Anything human, where possible, should be experienced, explored. Now this Varanian had come to Kyer's pavilion at the night fair and was not quite satisfied, had a slight complaint. Go and talk to it. Him, said Kyer. Me, sir? You speak their lingo. You speak half the damn gurglings of half the damn galaxy, don't you, Beldek? You lazy son of a gex. If you say so, Mr. Kyer. Beldek opened the long window and stepped through. The other side of the window looked like a door, glamorous with enamel paint and stained glass. Beldek bowed to the gentle Varanian with his hands to his face, which was the correct form of greeting from an outworlder. The Varanian stood impassive, ears folded. Fo och mir benun. The Varanian seemed gratified. It lifted its ears and broke into staccato Viranese. The glottal conversation continued for 2.5 minutes, after which, feeling Kyer's beady little eyes on him through the one-way door window, Beldek leisurely set the computer for a 20% refund. The Varanian took its cash and offered Beldek the salute used when bidding farewell to an inferior but valuable alien. Not all Earthmen knew exactly what the salute implied. A rough translation was, I will let you lick my feet another time, O wise one. Beldek, who did, smiled pleasantly. The wall ivory screens of the outer doors closed on the Varanian's exit. Beldek turned as Kyre came storming from the inner office. Kyre was a bulging, broad-faced type, the little eyes somewhat slanting, the mane of golden hair and implant. His clothes, though gaudy, were the best. Real silk shirt, wall leather sandals, a ruby in his neck chain. "Why'd you do that?" "What, Mr. Kyre, sir?" "Refund the bastard his money." 20%, the amount he agreed would compensate for the slight complaint. What was wrong with her? Beldek said, ultra-apologetically, fawningly, "A little something I told you about, that clicks." "Why the Garbundian hell didn't you, for Christ's sake, get it fixed?" "I've tried, Mr. Kyre," said Beldek humbly. "I truly have." Kyre glowered. "I should put you out on your butt. Why don't I?" "I'm useful?" Beldek said, attempting humbly to be helpful now. "Like Erksfaren you are. All right. Give me the receipts. I'm going over to Next Valley. I'll be here again 5-day week. Chackie'll be by in 3 days. Beldek keyed the computer for the cash receipts, tore them off when they came, and presented them to Kyre. Kyre riffled through them, glancing for mistakes. "Okay, Beldek, I want to hear from Chackie that she's back in good order, you savvy?" "Oh, yes, Mr. Kyre, sir." Kyre swore. At the wall ivory doors, he turned for one last snarl. "I've got other concerns on this planet, Beldek. If Malvanda packs up, it's no great loss to me. You're the one who'll suffer. Back to hoofing the space lanes with your card tricks and your dipscop seventh-rate jar. You get me?" "To the heart, sir," said Beldek. "And all the way up yours, Mr. Kyre." Kyre cursed him and slammed out. The doors, ever serene, whispered shut in his wake. Beldek leaned on the ornamental counter, keying the computer, which he had long ago rigged to count the amount he had creamed off Kyre's takings for the last 5-day period. Kyre, of course, guessed he did this. It was an inevitable perk of the job. All told, Kyre seemed to value disliking Beldek, value the hypertensive rage that came to the boil whenever Beldek's cool, clear eyes met his with such angelic sweetness above the long, smiling mouth that said, "Yes, Mr. Kyre, sir." Most of the human portion of the Valley of Lights knew about Kyre's hatred of his employee Beldek, the drifter from the space lanes. Beldek, who could speak half the languages of the galaxy and could charm rain from a desert sky if he wanted. Usually he didn't want to. Beldek, whose unimplanted, long, thick, lank, brass-colored hair hung on his shoulders and over his high, wide forehead. Lean as a sculpture and tall, from birth on some unspecified lower-gravity world, pale and pale-eyed. Something about him, more than the rumored past, card shark, kept creature of male, female, humanoid, tales of a man murdered out among the stars, more than the fact of working for Kyre, in attendance on one of the weirdest novelties of the night fair. Be careful of Beldek. The pavilion stood on a rise. A quarter of a mile below, a bowl of dizzy fires, the arena of arson, flashed and flared. Back away, one of the great wheels whirled gold against the black sky, but the crimson pavilion was clouded round with Syrian cedars. Far-off lamps winked on their branches. The apex of the pavilion, a diadem of rose-red glass lit subtly from within, just pierced with a wicked symbolism of many carnal things from the upper boughs. Once among the trees, the rest of the fair seemed siphoned off. You came to the kiosk with the ivory doors. You went in, read something, signed something, paid something, and were let through another door, this one of black sinewy's lacquer. And then the fair was very far away indeed. For then you were in the mansion of Malvanda, and she was there with you. A faint bell chimed on the console. Beldek killed the readout and looked urbanely at the door screens. Another customer. The doors opened. A New Worlder stepped through. He was alone. Most of them came alone, the same as most were men, or rather most were male, a mixture of human and some genetically adhesive other race. The New Worlder was fresh-skinned, grinning, handsome, and without whites to his eyes. "Say," he said. "Good evening, gentle Newman. You wish to visit Malvanda's mansion?" "Sure," said the New Worlder. "Take a seat, please." Grinning, the New Worlder rippled onto a couch. Double-jointed, too. That should offer Malvanda a challenge. Beldek came around the counter and extended a small steel wafer. "You understand, this entertainment being of the kind it is, you must first sign a disclaimer?" "Yes, sure." The New Worlder was already excited, a little drunk or otherwise stimulated. That had usually happened, too, before they got themselves to these doors. The Newman accepted the wafer, which hummed and spoke to him, telling him of possible dangers involved in what he was about to experience. As it droned on, the Newman grinned and nodded and grinned, and sometimes his all-blue eyes went to Beldek, and he grinned wider as if they were in a conspiracy. When the machine finished, the New Worlder was already up at the counter, his 6 fingers out for the disclaimer and stylus. He signed with a flourish. He paid the fee in one large bill and shiftily counted his change from habit, not really concentrating. "What now?" "Now you meet the lady." "Say," said the Newman. Beldek fed the disclaimer into the computer. The back of the kiosk murmured and rose, revealing the black lacquer door. The New Worlder tensed. There was sudden sweat on his face, and he licked his lips. Then the door opened inward. Standing well back by the counter, Beldek got a glimpse of somber plush, silky, wine-smoked light, the vague shimmer of draperies in a smooth wind scented with camellias and sorrow flowers, the floral things of drugged funerals. He had seen the poisonously alluring aperture, that throbbing carnelian camellia vulva of doorway, many thousands of times. The New Worlder had not. Mindlessly, helplessly, he went forward, as if mesmerized, and poured over the threshold. A heavy curtain fell. The door swung shut. The ultimate orifice had closed upon him. Beldek moved around behind the counter and touched the voyeur button. He watched for less than a minute, his face matte as fresh linen, ironed, young, and expressionless. Then he cut off the circuit. Such a device, mostly unknown to clients, was necessary by law, which did not call it a voyeur button. Persons who underwent such events as Malvanda had to be monitored and easy of access should an emergency occur. Twice before Beldek joined the show, a client had died in there. Because the disclaimers were in order and medical aid was rushed to the spot, Kyre was covered and no action resulted. The Newman, however, had registered healthy on the wafer. Beldek had told at a glance he was strong. There was no need to watch. Kyre sometimes came around just to do that. There was a more private extension of the voyeur button in the cubicle off the inner office. Kyre had not invented Malvanda's mansion, only sponsored the design, and then bought the product. But he liked it. He liked to watch. Sometimes Kyre brought a friend with him. Beldek went into the inner office and dropped crystals in his ears that would play him an hour of wild, thin music, a concerto for Celestina and Star Steel. He did not need to watch Malvanda. He knew what happened. When the hour was up, Beldek tidied the office and reset the computer. The panels dimmed one by one as the lamps softened in the kiosk, and the carnal peak on the roof went out. The New Worlder was the last customer of the night. In 30 minutes, dawn would start to seep across the eastern hills. As Beldek was revamping the computer program for the next night, the black lacquered door shifted open behind him. He heard the Newman emerge, stumbling a little on his double joints. The hiccuping footsteps got all the way to the wall ivory doors before the voice said, "Say." The voice had changed. It was husky, demoralized. "Say." Reluctantly, abrasively polite, Beldek turned. He leveled a wordless query at the sagging male by the kiosk doors. The Newman's eyes were muddy, looking sightless. He seemed to go on trying to communicate. "Yes, sir?" "Nothing," said the New Worlder. "Just nothing." The doors opened, and like a husk, he almost blew into the diluting darkness and away through the dregs and embers of the fair. Whatever else, the click in the mechanism obviously hadn't spoiled it for him at all. By day, the night fair goes to ground. Some of the big architectures and marts sink down literally into the bedrock. Others close up like clams. Coming over the hills too early, you get a view of acres of bare earth, burned-looking, as if after some disaster. Here and there, the robot cleaning machines wander in a snowstorm of rinds, wrappers, drug stick butts, lost tinsels, places that stand naked to the two eyes of heaven. The pair of dog sons have a look of peeled potatoes, indecent and vulnerable. Awnings of durable weight like rags, dipped flags, for the glow and glitter of neon night. The peoples of the night fair are wolves, foxes, kumors. They sleep by day in their burrows or their nests up in the scaffolded phantom towers among the peaceful wrecks of sky buses, their rye lemon dreams filling the air with acids. In the last of the afternoon there begins to be some movement, furtive. Rats on a golden hill of rubbish littered with tin can calliopes. "Beldek, is that you Gexy guy?" Kyre's runner, Chalky, having used his key to the wall ivory doors, peered about the office. "Who else did you hope to find?" Beldek was tinkering with a small box of wires and 3 or 4 laser battery tools. He did not turn around. Chalky now and then dropped by, never when expected, checking up for Mr. Kyre or just nosing. Scrawny and pretty, Chalky was a being of instinct rather than thought or compunction, an alley cat that runs in, steals a chicken dinner, pees in a corner, and, soulless physical ghost, is gone. "What you doing, lovely Beldek?" "Trying to repair a click." My Malvanda clicketh. Yeah, I heard about it. Better now?" "We shall see." "You going in to give it to her?" Beldek walked past him toward the back wall of the kiosk, which was going up to reveal the door of sinewe's lacquer. "You lucky buck. Bet she bends ya." "So long, Chacky." The lacquer door started to open. Chacky stared tiptoe over Beldek's shoulder into camellia, carnelian, lilies go roses, funereal Virgo unintacta. "Let's have a piece, Belle." "If you can afford it. Come back tonight with the other clientele." "Go swift yourself, bell rung." The curtain fell. The door had closed. Beyond the door, no matter the time of day or season, it was always midnight in Indian summer. Around the great oval room, long windows seemed to give on to a hot, perfumed night, mobile only with the choruses of crickets. There were lush gardens out there under the multiplicity of stars, the best constellations of 10 planets, and beyond the garden, hills, the backs of black lions lying down. Now and then a moth or two fluttered like bright flakes of tissue past the open glass. They never came in. It might distract the customer. The roof apparently was also of glass, ribbed into veins, like the ceiling of a conservatory. You saw the stars through it, and soon a huge white moon would come over, too big to be true. There were carpets on the walls, draperies hung down, plum velvets, transparencies with embroidery and sequins, dividing the room like segments of a dream. Everything bathed in the aromatic smoke of a church of incense candles. The other scent was flowers. They bloomed out of the bodies of marble animals grouped around little oases of water thick with sinuous snakefish. Red-black flowers, albino flowers, flowers stained between red and white and black, gray flowers, fever and blush flowers, bushes of pale, sighing faints. The marble stair went up to shadows, reflected in the polished floor. If you looked in the floor at the reflection, presently something moved, upside down, a figure in fluid. Then you looked up again at the stair, and saw Malvanda, out of the shadows, coming down. Malvanda was tall and 22 years old, slim but not slender, her shoulders wide for elegance, her hips wide as if to balance panniers, her waist to be spanned by a man's hands, her breasts high and firm and full to fill them, spill them. Malvanda's skin was as white as the sorrow flowers, with just that vague, almost colorless flush at the temples, earlobes, hollow of the throat, insteps, wrists, that the sorrow flowers had at the edges of their petals. She was platinum blonde, flaxen hair without a trace of gold or yellow, hair white like moonlight blanching metal. Her eyebrows were just 2 shades darker, but her lashes were like tarnished brass, and her eyes like untarnished brass. Wolf-color eyes, large, glowing now, fixed on him. A small movement of her head shifted the coils of platinum hair away, over her shoulder. The column of her throat went down and down into the crimson dress. The V of the neckline ended just under her breasts. She smiled a little, just a very little. Her lips were a softer crimson than the gown. Rose mouth. She began to come toward him, and her hand stole from her side, moving out to him ahead of her, as if it couldn't wait to make contact. Beldek walked up to her, and as the smooth hand floated to his arm, guided her fingers away. He ran his own hand in under the heavy silk hair to the base of her skull and touched. Switched off, Malvanda stood quite still, her lips slightly parted, her eyes dreaming, brazen, swimming with late afternoon veldt. Beldek ran his thumb around her throat and jabbed into the hollow. He pressed the second disc under her right ear and the third under her left index fingernail, deactivating the safety. There had to be a suitably obtuse series of pressures to avoid random deactivation by a client when caressing her. Beldek knelt at Malvanda's feet. He raised the hem of her gown and drew one flawless foot onto his knee. He gripped under the instep and drew out the power booster from the panel. Then he got up and went around, undoing the cling zip on the back of her gown. The keyboard opened where her lower spine should be. He compared it to the box of wires he had brought in. Then, selecting one of the fine plumbing needles, he began to work on her. After 4.5 minutes, he found the fault that might be responsible for the unfortunate click that had offended the aesthetic values of the Varanian. 2 levers, the size of whiskers, had unaligned and were rubbing together. Looking through the magnifier, he eased them away and put in a drop of stabilizer. That area of the board could be overheating, causing the lever's unwanted expansion together. He would need to check it again in a couple of days. Having closed the panel and sealed her dress, he replaced the power booster in her foot. The gauge in her board had showed nearly full, so it was time to empty the sack before reactivating. Very gently, Beldek parted her beautiful carmine lips and reached in, past the beautiful teeth, to the narrow tube of throat. The sack was not too easy to come at, of course. When Kyre took him on, the first two things he had wanted to see were Beldek's hands, articulate and long-fingered. They had passed the test. Beldek was halfway through disposing of the sack's contents when he heard a noise behind him. The moon was coming up over the glass ceiling, augmenting the candle and lamplight. Not that he really needed it to see Chucky, transfixed there against the curtain with his mouth open and his eyes bulging. Before coming in, Beldek always cut off the voyeur button, both on the console and in the office cubicle. At such times as this, the computer would only release the black lacquer door to Beldek. Somehow, Chucky had found a way either to fool the computer or to force the door. "What the Garbundian hop hell are you doing, Beldek?" said Chucky, all agog. "Emptying the sack," said Beldek, "as you saw." "Yeah, but—" Chucky burst into a wild laugh. "Holla, man, you're kinkier than I ever thought." Chucky, unable to spy in the usual way, had obviously badly wanted to see Beldek in operation with Malvanda. Chucky had always blatantly imagined Beldek liked to get free what the patrons paid for. If he'd managed an entry 1 minute earlier or 1 minute later, it need not have mattered. "Kinkier than you thought? Of course I am, Chucky." Beldek resettled the sack in Malvanda's mouth and let it go down the throat. Always an easier maneuver, this, than retraction. He keyed on the relays. Malvanda did not move just yet. She took a moment to warm up after deactivation. "I suppose I'll have to bribe you now, Chucky, won't I?" Chucky giggled. He looked nervous. In a second he would start to back away. "How about," said Beldek, "a free ride with Malvanda?" Then he sprinted, faster than any alley cat, straight through the candle-lamp moonlight. He caught Chucky like a lover. "How about that?" he asked. And Chucky shivered against him, scared now, but not quite able to make up his mind to run. Beldek led him firmly, kindly stroking him a little, to the center of the floor where Malvanda had been left standing. As they got near, her eyelids flickered. "She's something," said Chucky. "Maybe I could come round tonight." "Busy tonight. Do it now. You always wanted to. Have fun." Chucky's shiver grew up into a shudder. He glanced toward the curtained door. Then Malvanda woke up. Beldek moved aside. Malvanda's hand went to Chucky's face, sensuous and sure. She was taller than Kyre's runner, Beldek's height. Her mouth parted naturally now, the wonderful, strange smile inviting, certain, just showing the tips of the teeth. This time, Beldek would watch. Chucky wriggled, still afraid, but the drugs in the candles were affecting him by now, and the water lily touches on the neck, the chest, slipping, lingering. He put out one hand, careful, into her neckline, and found a breast. Half frightened, aroused, wanting approval, he looked at Beldek. "She feels real." "She's meant to, Chucky." "Hey, I never really saw what you—" "That's okay, Chucky. Enjoy." Malvanda's strawberry tongue ran over Chucky's lips. Her left arm held him like a loved child. Her right hand moved like a small, trusting animal seeking shelter, and discovered it there in Chucky's groin, and played and tickled and burrowed and coiled. They were on the couch now, Chucky with his clothes off, handfuls of Malvanda's gown clenched in his fists, his nose between her breasts, was writhing and squeaking. Malvanda bent her head to do the thing they paid for, the thing Chucky had not paid for, the true thrill, the perverse, unique titillation that Malvanda offered. Her platinum hair fell over them, obscuring. But Beldek knew what went on under the wave of hair. Chalky was coming, noisily and completely, the way most of them did. Beldek walked quickly across to the couch. He tapped Malvanda on the right shoulder just once. He had had the maintenance of her a long while. He had been able to innovate a little, a very little. Enough. Provision for a chalky day. Chalky was subsiding, then struggling. "Beldek," he said. "She's still. Ah, Christ. Beldek." His arms flailed and his legs, as, naked and puny, Chalky tried to push Malvanda away. But Malvanda was strong as only a machine could be. She held him down, pinned beneath her, her marmoreal body oblivious of the kicks and scratches that did not even mar its surface as she went on doing what Beldek had just told her to go on doing. Ignoring the screams that gradually became more frenzied and hopeless, Beldek walked out of Malvanda's mansion. The marks where the door had been forced were not bad, but quite plain. A paint job would see to it. Chalky would have planned to do that before Kyre got back. Now, Kyre would have to see them. Beldek shut the door, and Chalky's last wailing, thinning shrieks were gone. Just before sunset, Beldek called Kyre on the interphone. He broke the news mildly. Kyre's runner had got through the mansion door when Beldek was in the bathroom. Entering the mansion to check Malvanda, Beldek found Chalky. He had died of hemorrhage and shock, the way the two others had. There was, obviously, no disclaimer. What did Kyre want him to do? He could hear the boss man sweating all along the cable from Next Valley. "You called anyone else, Beldek?" "No." "The pole?" "Not yet." He listened to Kyre bubbling over there. The two prior deaths in Kyre's pavilion made things awkward, despite all the cover on the world. This third death, minus cover, could look like shoddy goods, and Chalky was a private matter. Beldek had known what Kyre would do. "All right, don't call him. You listening, Beldek?" "Oh yes, Mr. Kyre, most attentively." "Don't scad me, Beldek. I'm going to give you a number. You call that. Someone will come see to things, okay?" "Anything you say, Mr. Kyre." "And keep your mouth shut." "Yes, sir." Kyre gave him the number, and he used it. The voice at the other end was mechanized. He said to it the brace of phrases Kyre had briefed him with. Then there were noises, and the line went blind. The suns were stubbed out, and the wild flame wheels began to turn on the sky of Indian ink, and the colored arsons shot across the arena bowl below, and the carousels practiced their siren songs and got them perfect. Someone came and tried to breach the darkened pavilion. Beldek went out and stood on the lawn. Two Feshines stared from their steamy eyes, lashing their tails in the grass. "Dina mies, condlues solues dibit?" Beldek told them in Fesh. The show was closed. The gentle Fesh did dibbit and went off spitting to each other. The nondescript Carrie van drew up an hour later. Men walked into the kiosk and presently into the mansion. They walked out with a big plastic bag and took it away. Beldek had already cleaned up before they came. Not much later, Beldek lit the pavilion and opened for business, but no one else stopped by that night. Beldek sat up in the tall, echoing hills, watching the dawn borning and the night fair slink to the ground. Malvanda, had she been real, would not have been able to do this. Sunlight was anathema to Malvanda's kind. Sunlight and mirrors and garlic flowers and thorns and crucifixes and holy wafers and running water. It just went to show. Beldek leaned back on the still cool slate, looking down the 4x5 miles of the valley. Gorgeous Malvanda, Terran Turn-On, Fesh Tashsa Mi. Venusian wet dream, angel of orgasm, kiss of death. Malvanda, the beautiful biting machine. Malvanda, the robot vampire. He didn't know her whole story, how some sick-minded talent had thought her up and put her together. Her place of origin was a mystery, but what she did, he knew that. A connoisseur's sexual desideratum. The actual bite was controlled to a hair's breadth by her keyboard. The teeth went in, naturally. She sucked out blood. That's what they paid for, was it not? Money's worth. Blood money. Only a little, of course. More would be dangerous. And the teeth left built-in coagulant behind them, zippering up the flesh all nice. Unimpaired, the client staggers forth, only a bit woozy. A bite woozy. Some of them even came back, days, months, years later, for another turn. It was harmless, unless you were sick, had some weakness. Or unless Beldek tapped Malvanda's right shoulder that particular way he had when she was with Chalky. Then another key snapped down its command through her wires and circuits, and Malvanda kept on biting and sucking like a bloody vacuum cleaner, till all the blood was in Malvanda's throat sac and spilling over and on the floor and everywhere. But Beldek had cleaned that away and bathed her and changed her gown before Kyre's goon friends arrived with their big plastic bag. It had been fairly uncomplex to tidy his mistake, this time, but he must beware of mistakes from now on. Tomorrow, today, Beldek would work something out to make the mansion door impregnable. Even so, Beldek didn't really mind too much. It had been a bonus, all that blood. Better than just the contents of the sack, which Chalky had, unfortunately for Chalky, seen Beldek drinking earlier. Beldek sunned himself on the hills for several hours. He never browned in sunshine, but he liked it. It was good for him. His hair, the tone of Malvanda's eyes, gleamed and began playfully to curl. When he strolled back through the valley, the fair was in its somnolent jackal-and-bone midday phase. Kyre's buggy was at the entry to the pavilion. Kyre was inside, in the mansion, pawing Malvanda over, and the furnishings, making sure everything had been left as the customers would wish to find it. Beldek followed him in. "I should throw you out on your butt," said Kyre. "Throw me out," said Beldek. "I'll have some interesting stories to tell." Kyre glared. "Don't think you can make anything out of what happened. It was your, for Christ's sake, negligence." They both knew that Kyre would never fire him. Beldek was too handy at the job, and knew too much, and would be too difficult to dispose of. Presently they went into the office, and Kyre handed Beldek a sheaf of large notes. "Any noise," said Kyre, "something might happen you might not be happy about, and fix that damn door. She seems okay. She damaged at all?" "No, still what your pamphlets say. The night-blooming belladonna of eternal Gothic fantasy." When Kyre had gone, Beldek listened to symphonies on music crystals in the office. It had always rather fascinated him, the way in which vampires, a myth no one any longer believed, had become inextricably and dependently connected with sex. Actually, vampirism had nothing to do with sex. Beldek could have told them that, just as it had nothing to do with sunlight or mirrors or crosses. It was simply and solely, though not S-O-U-L-L-Y solely, about basic nourishment. Later, he set the program for the night. He had a premonition there would be a lot of custom. Somehow, without anyone knowing about it in any logical way, some enticing whiff of velvet morbidity would be blowing around the pavilion, luring them in like flies. The sack would have to be emptied many times tonight, in Beldek's own special way, which was not the way in which the instruction manual advocated. Just before it got dark and he lit up the lights to match the exploding ignition of the fair, Beldek looked in on Malvanda. She had been returned to her shadowy alcove above the marble stair and was waiting there for the first client to come in and gaspingly watch her descend. Beldek climbed the steps and brushed her platinum hair and refilled the perfumery glands behind her ears. He cared nothing for the sentient races that were his prey, but for the beautiful biting machine he felt a certain malign affection. Why not? After a century or so of insecure, monotonous, and frequently inadequate hit-and-miss hunting, which left little space for other pursuits, the night fair had provided Beldek the softest option on 20 worlds. Now, Malvanda saw to everything. She paid his bills. She kept him fed.